Nexus PMG welcomes you to the Bigger Than Us podcast, which we as energy geeks lovingly refer to as the BTU. Bigger Than Us is a podcast that focuses on ideas that will shape the future of our planet and ultimately our existence. We will occasionally lean into energy topics because, after all, it's the key to our collective survival. But we'll also explore other ideas and topics that we believe will have an impact that is bigger than us. And now, on to today's show. Hello, and welcome to the Bigger Than Us podcast. I'm your host, Raj Daniels, and today I'd like to welcome Kerry Bowie to the show. Kerry Bowie is the managing partner of Msaada Partners and the Majira project. Msaada is Swahili for service, and the strategy firm empowers social impact through consulting, coaching, and connecting. Majira is Swahili for summer. So, in a nod to the growing season, the Nonprofit Accelerator Program and Innovator Support Organization helps small businesses and startups grow with a mission of community development through entrepreneurship. Kerry also launched the Browning the Green Space Initiative, which is a group of cross sector leaders striving to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in clean energy and beyond. Kerry, how are you doing today?
Raj, I am doing well. All things considered, in this crazy 2020 that we're in, I am doing well and happy to be here.
Well, thank you. It's been quite a ride, hasn't it?
Definitely a ride. Just trying to hold on this year.
So, Kerry, where are you currently located?
So I am in Somerville in my basement. Moved from a co-working space in Boston to really working from home. So Somerville is just outside of Cambridge, which is just north of Boston.
How's the weather up there?
It rained cats and dogs yesterday. Uh, so I think it's still wet today, but not as bad as it was yesterday.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear it. So, Kerry, I like to start the show by asking my guest the following question. If you were asked to share something interesting about yourself, what would it be?
Something interesting about myself. Let's see. I think I've always played in a number of different, spaces. So in the public sector, the private sector, the non-governmental sector, and that goes back to even when I first started, college. I started on a Navy ROTC scholarship at MIT. And maybe this is an interesting piece of that. Not exactly where I ended up, but this was around the time of Top Gun. So I thought I was going to be a fighter pilot or a Rio. So back in the Maverick and Goose days.
So, if I'm going to place that, that was the early 90s, perhaps?
Early 90s, yes.
I got you. I got you. Very nice. So, where does this interest in different areas of life stem from?
My mom was a teacher. My mom was a biology teacher. I think everything. I think everyone's sort of built around sort of their family, their faith, and media. Sort of shape who you are, and so my mom was a biology teacher and chemistry teacher, uh, which was great because being a teacher, she was home in the summer. We spent a lot of time, at museums or sort of walking around parks and, naming trees and leaves and, animals. So I think I always had, that piece. And my dad was a public servant in a sense. He was, he was in the army, did a couple of tours in Vietnam. He was paratrooper, and so I think there was this piece around service that I got from both my mom and my dad, and being able to help in whatever way you can.
So, now that you're a parent, it sounds like your parents instilled quite a bit of curiosity in you. Now that you're a parent, how do you do the same for your children?
I think we try to let and I've got two daughters, 9 and 12, and I'm sure they're on a Zoom call or something right now. As school is going on above me, and my wife's probably on a Zoom too. I wish I would have invested some money in some of these companies that are boosting web services and things like that. But we just really try to allow them to be curious and try to answer questions. And I think it's actually a privilege that I can, as an engineer by training, when they have questions, I sort of dig in deep and I explain probably too deeply at times when they're going, Dad, that's too much. We didn't really have to go there, but being able to do that, and really my older daughter, uh, she was really like obsessed with Hamilton, and really just thinking, we moved away from civics in this country. We're not teaching civics as much, and so I thought it was a great way for her to get sort of involved. And then as we see the election play out, I think we've got a sort of real world, sort of practical example of civics and how all of these things play together. And so we've had many conversation about that. And so I think just really being there to serve as a sounding board, to listen, and to allow them to do the things that they want to do. My 12-year-old, she couldn't vote, and she didn't have money to donate to campaigns, but she was calling. Calling to battleground states and doing her part to be active.
So your home sounds like my home. We have Hamilton, I think, going nonstop 24 hours a day whenever they're awake. Before we move on, what's your favorite song?
Um, oh man, that's interesting. My daughter would be upset at me. She want maybe I'm not gonna miss my shot. Um, that's I mean all of them are so good. Yeah, I'll go with that one.
And mine is In the Room When It Happened.
Yeah, that's a good one too.
Well, let's switch gears here. You mentioned service earlier. Can you give the audience an overview of Msaada Partners and your role at the organization?
Yeah, so Msaada Partners is the strategy consulting firm that I started coming out of state government. Msaada is Swahili for service, and so the thought was that uh, we empower social impact through consulting, um, coaching, and connecting, and really just trying to make sure that the target is on organizations led by founders of color or organizations that are, targeting underserved or under-resourced communities, and really doing that. If I give the background, I was doing a lot of work with MIT's venture mentoring service. I was helping a lot of startups and companies to do work on sort of a volunteer basis. They just didn't look like me. They were mostly young white guys and Asian students, and so did not see a lot of African Americans or Latinx, and also not a lot of women per se. I was trying to see how we could help there, and so that's how we started. Unfortunately, startups and small businesses don't typically have the money to pay for consulting fees, and so we had to pivot a little bit. So we got other people to pay us to work with the company. So had a contract with the city of Boston. Actually, just now about to apply to re up on that. We, I started doing work formally with MIT, where I am a core instructor with the National Science Foundation. So I am an instructor for their Innovation Core or I-Core program. And we started to work with some nonprofits who had a little more funds to work on sort of strategic plans or to think about earned income and earned revenue. The only problem with that, Raj, is doing the I-Core work. Still didn't see a lot of Black or brown people in that program. Even some of the work with the city of Boston wasn't necessarily working with Black or brown founders or owners. Did do a lot of that with some of the nonprofits, but it wasn't in the for-profit space where I was targeting. And so that really led to um, starting a pro bono program with one of my classmates from MIT Sloan, who was at the time a partner and managing director at the Boston Consulting Group. And out of that came the Majira project. So, similarly, in Swahili, Majira is Swahili for summer. And so, in a nod to the growing season, what we do is we try to help those small businesses that I was talking about in the for-profit space to grow. So, similar to a seed or a seedling, it needs sunlight, water, nutrients, a pot to grow in or a place to take root. Startups and small businesses need the same thing, but in the form of consulting, coaching, connections, capital, access to capital. So that's what we do, and we formally turned that into a nonprofit earlier this year. Actually, on Juneteenth, purposely did it on Juneteenth. In terms of the significance of that day, and yeah, that's where we are.
Well, congratulations on that. Let's double click here on one of your initiatives regarding or called Browning the Green Space. Can you share with the audience what that is and what you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, and I think it dovetails really well from, excuse me, the work with Msaada Partners and the Majira project. And so, a couple of things we learned with the Majira project, over the last 4 years that we've been working on it, we learned that these small businesses, these startups, they need technical assistance. They need a sense of community or space, but also just connections. But what we really found out is they need access to capital. And the numbers are sort of staggering as you look at, the amount of funding that goes to, Black and brown, entrepreneurs. I think the number, and actually also if you think about women, the number is something like 3 to 4% of funding goes to women, and like 1% goes to African Americans. So if you happen to be a African American woman, I think it's something like 0.0003, or I don't even know what it is, but it's so small that it's in a sense laughable or maybe cryable. That it's somewhat sad that it's there. And so one of the in doing this work, I started to talk to a lot of angel investors and VCs across the country, especially VC funds being led by Black and brown people. And so one of those guys, my friend Ed Joan Louis, who's actually from Somerville, interestingly enough, and is now in California, he had a carve out for a company, not a lot, but maybe like 100K. And he reached out to me and said, "Hey, are you interested in investing in this Black founder out of Greentown Labs in Somerville, where I am?" And I said, "Hey, I'm starting all these things. I don't have the dry powder right now, but I'm happy to reach out to some people in my network." And that's what I did. And I reached out to them and specifically said, "Hey, would you be interested?" And actually, I'll just call his name, Josh Aviv. Josh Aviv is one of the founders of Spark Charge. And so they do battery packs for cars. And what I was able to do is, I reached out to a whole bunch of people and got them a little bit of money, maybe about 25K to go in this round. That was my specific request. But my general request is, hey, I would love to talk about browning the green space. I think I had gotten away from that when I left state government because, one, there's at least in Massachusetts where I am, there's a 1 year cooling off period where you're not supposed to, if you leave, work in those areas. And I was an associate commissioner of operations, so I touched a lot of stuff. I was doing brownfields, cleaning up contaminated properties. I was doing environmental justice work. I was doing food policy work. and I probably took it too far, but that is a little bit of that tax of being a black man in America. I think I was dotting my I's and crossing my T's. I wanted to be, probably was being ultra safe or ultra conservative. In that, I probably could have been a little more lax, but I didn't want to do that. And the problem was that 1 year turned into like 3.5, almost 4 years that I didn't do work uh, in sort of the green space where I'm trained. I did environmental engineering at MIT undergrad and got a master's at the University of Michigan, and actually got into the PhD program at Georgia Tech and worked in semiconductor manufacturing doing facilities and environmental and safety health work. But I hadn't really been doing that. And I think all of this sort of coming back full circle, I realized I was in a few meetings on this topic and going, wow, I feel like I still know more than most of the people in this meeting. And I haven't done this work in like 4 or 5 years. And so that was sort of an aha moment that said, hey, I really know this stuff. I should be doing work in the green space. And I think the other piece, the reason I left state government was a little bit about this. When I was doing work in environmental justice, talking about climate change and greenhouse gases, going around the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to what we call gateway cities. And for your listeners who aren't in Massachusetts, a gateway city is a city where there's, not Boston. Boston's the big nut, but those other big cities that, maybe there's been disinvestment. They probably have high immigrant populations. Manufacturing has moved away. There are going to be, lower income communities. There's probably high English isolation in these communities. And so in going around and talking in those communities about climate change and greenhouse gases, a lot of those folk would look at me like, hey, we're not climate change deniers. We get it. It's important. But for us, it's not as important as jobs. It's not as important as, affordable housing. It's not as important as education and affordable transportation and access to healthy food and the police, harassing us. And I got it. As a black man, I got it. But as an environmental engineer and a public servant, I was like, hey, these things are not mutually exclusive. And it's unfortunate that we're getting a lot of the, the black, brown, low, moderate income communities, we're getting more than their fair share of what I call the environmental bats, so the brownfields, the asthma, the pollution, but we're not, sort of missing out on the environmental goods. So missing out on the, clean tech, the energy efficiency, the renewable energy jobs. And I was going, hey, this has to change, because this is big. So one of my friends, David Danielson, who helped to start the MIT Energy Club, he's now at Breakthrough Energy Ventures out in California. But at a time he was at ARPA-E, and I think he was maybe an assistant secretary at the Department of Energy. I remember going down, and this will date it. Governor Schwarzenegger, he was Governor Schwarzenegger at the time. I went to a conference, and I remember being at that conference in D.C., and I think there were at least 1,000 people in the room, and I could count the black and brown people on two hands. And I didn't need all my fingers. There were probably like 7 people there, and I was going, hey, these people are not, and I'm not knocking tree huggers and environmentalists, and I love them, but this is not who was in the room. These were people who were, business people making money. And they were, they saw the business opportunity in this space. And I was going, man, we are about to be left out again. So that was really what precipitated me leaving, is say, I want to brown the green space. The problem was, like I said, I was being cautious, trying to adhere to that 1 year cooling off period. And I got somewhat distanced from it. But this piece of doing the Majira project and meeting these VCs and understanding this capital piece, it brought me back to what is now Browning the Green Space. And so, like I said, I got money for Josh and Spark Charge. And interestingly enough, maybe a month or so ago, Josh and his partner, they actually were on Shark Tank. And
I saw that.
so they received some investment from Mark Cuban and Lori Grinner. And so, but I knew Josh before that. And so, like I said, we got the money, but I think more exciting and more important than that is I woke up some folk in the Boston area who said, "Hey, we would love to have this conversation with you about browning the green space." And so people at the Northeast Clean Energy Council, people at New England Women in Energy and Environment, people at the Prime Coalition and Prime Impact Fund, people at the American Association of Blacks in Energy, and others. And so I could, and I'm probably probably got myself in trouble just naming a few, but there are a number of organizations. But we started having conversations, and those conversations, I think I sent that message that I referred to back like the beginning of August in 2019. And I think I had a few conversations with some folk over that summer, and by that fall, we said, "Hey, let's open this up. Let's invite some more people." We did that, and this was pre-COVID, so we got to do those meetings in person. We did a meeting in October, came back and did another meeting in February. I think we were scheduled to meet, and then that's when COVID hit, and so everything from there went virtual. So we did everything online, but we had a few more meetings, and like I said, we formally incorporated Browning the Green Space as a nonprofit in Massachusetts at the end of September.
So let's speak directly about grounding the green space. Earlier this year, quite a few cities in Texas, Dallas and Houston being the big ones, released climate action plans. If you had the ear of, let's say, government officials, establishment, etc., what are some of the steps they could take to start browning the green space? You mentioned funding, obviously the first one, but what are some other steps they could take?
So that's great, and maybe let me explain what we're doing, and maybe that will help, because I think governments can be involved in not all of the pieces, because I am, and I don't they're not necessarily colors, but I grew up in Alabama and spent time in Texas, but I was schooled in Massachusetts and Michigan, so I'm about as purple as they come. I'm sort of right in the in the middle, and so I believe in sort of right size government. I think government can't fix everything. I think that the private sector has to play, and I think they need to play, by the rules that they play by, which is, I think there definitely is a profit motive, but I do believe in triple bottom line, and I think that's one of my biggest learnings of being in the public sector is, man, it's so much harder to me than private sector. Private sector is very easy to identify who your customer is. You can actually fire customers. You can be really focused. You cannot do that in government. So in government, everybody is a stakeholder, and everybody you need to take care of to a certain extent. And so in a sense, it does not become a maximization. In the private sector, you maximize profits. In the public sector, it's an optimization or mini max deal where it's interesting, where you sort of know you've done your job when nobody's completely happy. and so it's a weird sort of space to be, and oftentimes it's pretty, you know, thankless, because nobody is being truly ever completely fulfilled, except in a few cases. So, with that being said, the 5 pillars that we're working on in browning the green space are, first, around careers. Is really, how are we sort of mapping out a pathway to employment for Black and brown folk and low moderate income folk, women, but our target is on race, not gender. One, because they're women who are part of, they're Black women and they're Latinx or Latinas, and so I think we get that because oftentimes, unfortunately, you see when people talk diversity, they'll point to the gender lens and it's about white women, and that's it can't just be that. We've got to
Hmm.
do more if we're really talking about diversity in this country. So I think our first is around careers, and so how do we have a pathway? And so I guess there's an education side to that. That's elementary and secondary education. That's about trade schools. That's about community colleges. So I think you're right from a government perspective. What are governments doing to make sure that the education that they're providing is setting people up for the jobs that are in high demand and that are needed. And everybody doesn't have to go to an Ivy League, and most people don't need to go. That's not the training that people need. But how do we make sure people understand the training that's necessary, for this green economy? So that's one is focusing on careers. Second is focusing on companies. Which is sort of the backside of that. It's sort of a two-sided marketplace. So, where do those people who are looking for gainful employment go? They go to companies. How are those companies finding them? And so we're working with those companies to make sure that they don't have unconscious bias, or not don't have it. They are going to have it, but they can get beyond it. That they can put some structural and systemic or systematic things in place to make sure that they're not blinded by those biases. That they're intentional about where they're looking. Are they looking at at the collegiate level? Are they looking at historically Black colleges and universities? Are they looking at Hispanic serving institutions? Are they looking at the National Society of Black Engineers, NSBE, or the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, SHIP, or ACES, looking at the indigenous population? And so really being able to do things like that and think about it, and also just having some of that, some of those tough conversations within corporations, because a lot of stuff is still old boy network. People come in because of it's who not what you know.
Hmm.
And how do we sort of change that, and not just for sort of white collar jobs, also blue collar jobs. In the union shops and the union halls, are you bringing in Black people? Are you bringing in brown people? Are you bringing in women? And so I think there are some places for government and regulation in there, but a lot of it is also on the market side. And I think our piece is, looking at this as, white collar and blue collar jobs, they both are green collar jobs. And so that's really our focus is on those green collar jobs. So Raj, it started with careers, then there are companies, and then going back to what you said, there's this whole funding piece, and we split that into two groups. And so one is capital, is what we're calling it, and that capital is probably more venture capital. And so going back to like a Josh at Spark Charge, or there are other companies, and I can name a bunch of them, but how do we get them the technical assistance, the consulting, the or the accelerators, the incubators, because even you know you're in Dallas, but Greentown Labs is here in Somerville. They just opened up in Houston, and so they're in Houston. Um, they're working on this, but you know, not a lot of Black and brown people there, and so I think they're actively and being more intentional about how they do that. But how can we make that so that's everywhere? That we're really thinking about that. So that's on the capital side. Is so how can we support entrepreneurs? And then I think similarly capital, but we're calling it something different, is if you think about working capital and growth capital, more for small businesses or medium enterprises, how do we support them as well? Really more the small businesses, and we're calling that contracts. And so how can we focus on small businesses and make sure they're getting the contracts And this goes back to that government piece around procurement. How are we making sure that the city of Houston or the city of Boston or other municipalities across the country, how are they making sure that vendors of color, especially in this green space, whether it's around solar or wind or energy efficiency or LEED buildings or around water or some type of food, something in the green climate tech or climate change space. How is that happening? And I don't. I'm here in Massachusetts, so it's easy for me to pick on Massachusetts and Boston because I'm most privy to that information. But the city of Boston, if you look back at their procurement and you target black owned companies, I mean that number was like less than 1% or
Mm-hmm.
less than 2%, as like the last reporting, and it was going, man, this is almost it's kind of crazy. Like that doesn't make any sense because that makes a difference. If one of those vendors can get a $500,000 contract or $1 million contract, that's a game changer because they can bring in some of that, front office or back office support that allows them also to go in and target other contracts. And there's some interesting things in Massachusetts. Our Massport organization is starting to do things where, not just having people come in as, black and brown folk as subs, but having them come in and take equity stakes in some of these projects, and they've sort of built that into their requisition, their RFP, process, and you can see how that starts to change, how that starts to have people coming together and making joint ventures, and it allows us to stand up some of these companies to do the work that they've been doing. They just haven't been able to do at scale. And so those are our four. So careers, companies, capital, contracts. And then the last one is really the first one. If I think about it, is around communities. Because ultimately, that's what we're trying to get to is, if you look at it, those folk in the gateway cities that I talked about, those black and brown and low moderate income folk, those are the folk who need the technologies and solutions of the green economy more than anybody, because they don't have a lot of disposable. They don't have disposable cash flow. A lot of them are living check to check, and so having your home buttoned up, having solar, having access to hybrid electric vehicles, that actually makes a difference. That having clean air is very different. If you're going back to sort of the tree huggers, there's a piece where, hey, it is about the environment. We got to have trees, to breathe, and we got to have the animals and all these things. But to me, this is all about people. I actually heard, then Senator Harris, now VP elect Harris, as she was, I think, fundraising here at one of the law firms, actually with Senator Mo Cowan, and she was talking about this, as a Californian, and saying this stuff is real. We have forest fires, we've got flooding, we've got little children who have asthma. That's what this is about to me. And so how do we change that? And so if I bring that back to the Northeast where we are, I think this was also like another aha moment for me. I sit on I'm a part of the MIT Sloan has a sustainability initiative where they bring in alums and they do a renewable energy finance roundtable. And people are talking about project finance and a bunch of different things in the space. And there are a handful of us who are thinking more at the community scale, and we do these challenge workshops. And so I did a challenge workshop probably 4 years ago. And in that challenge workshop, I talked about getting energy efficiency to low moderate income folk. And one of the data points that really jumped out to me, and I can't remember the exact figures, but the gist of it was that the Latinx population in Providence, Rhode Island, has the largest fraction of their sort of wallet dollars go to energy. And you go, hmm.
That really is interesting. That's something that my wife and I were speaking about recently, is that what percent of our income goes towards, paying energy bills versus other people. So continue with that.
Yeah. And so I think, and I can't remember if it was like, was it like 9% or I think it was, they may have been double digit where everybody else across the country was single digit. And it makes sense. One, they're not, they don't have a large wallet in the first place. So they're probably not salaried employees. They're probably, check to check, hourly employees. So one, you've got a smaller wallet size. Two, we're in the Northeast where we have some of the, higher energy costs in the country. So that's two. Three, we're in the Northeast where we got some of the oldest housing stock in the country. So it's not buttoned up. It's not tight. Three or four, I can't remember which number I'm on now, which bullet. They're probably not homeowners, so they're tenants. So you got those tenant owner issues. So the landlord he or she doesn't care, or does not have the incentive to fix it, because they're not paying the bill. So the bill goes to the tenant, and so in a sense, you don't have a bunch of money. Oh, and now the last piece, it gets pretty cold in Rhode Island, and so think about it. It's like really cold. You're paying the bills. You don't have a lot of money. You're in a sense you're like throwing money out the door or out the window. And we go, that's happening like all across the country. And so in Dallas, it might not be about heating; it's about cooling. And so you're going to have a similar issue there, where if you're throwing money out the house too, if you're air conditioning the outside because your place isn't buttoned up. And so I think there's a piece of what tends to happen, and this is going back to my conversation with the folk in the gateway cities, is a lot of black and brown and low moderate income people don't see this as relating to them. They see this green economy as a lot of it being for the rich, white, green, and vain. And that's sort of how we, a Tesla is. That's who you see. I don't see a lot of Teslas or Priuses or Prii or whatever you want to call them in Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan. The black neighborhoods, in Boston. You just don't see that. Every now and again, but we should, because they are the people who would get the most benefit, out of that, be able to keep, dollars in their pockets. So that's sort of where we are. So just to recap on brown and the green space, we're focused on, careers, we're focused on companies, on capital, on contracts, and on communities.
So I appreciate that in-depth explanation. You've taken on some really big initiatives. Magic wand, 10 years from now, what has Msaada Partners achieved?
Yeah. So in terms of Msaada Partners and what we've done, um, you know, I really just want to, and I think this comes back to everything, and maybe is sort of a good way to sort of frame it. Um, I'm working at the intersection of sort of three areas. So I'm looking through a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens. I'm looking through an energy and environment lens, and I'm looking through an entrepreneurship and innovation lens. And so I am happiest when I'm working with at that intersection of all three of those things. So if I can be working with a black or brown founder, in a for-profit, startup that's doing work in the green space, like I'm excited because I'm getting to use sort of all of me. And from a magic wand perspective, and I think this gets back to like why we're really doing this work is, I would say before sort of COVID, and I think we got this on our website, before COVID and a lot of the racial injustices and things that we've seen of late, here in 2020, I would say arguably the two biggest problems facing the country are climate change and the wealth gap. And that's where we're trying to work. So how can we tackle climate change, both on the adaptation and mitigation side, and how can we tackle the wealth gap? How can we create jobs and create wealth? And I think there's a way to do that by getting Black and brown people more involved in the green space, because I don't want us to miss this wave. At least not here in Boston, not here in Massachusetts, in New England and the Northeast. This is where we're starting, but I think that there are similar opportunities all across the country to be doing this type of work.
Well, I look forward to seeing your vision align for you. Last question. If you could share some advice or words of wisdom with the audience, and it could be personal or professional, what would it be?
I think when I talk to young people or like career changers or different folk, if and I say this is free advice, so it might be worth what you pay for it, but I think making sure that you are following your passion is so important. I think oftentimes when I'm talking to young folk, they're first looking for like who will hire me, and then they're sort of looking at their toolbox of like what am I good at. But I think most or importantly is what is it that what drives you, and what are you excited about? And if you start with that, and you really think outside of yourself and how you can be of service to others and be of service to the country, or be of service to something bigger than you, which I guess is in line with this podcast. How can you do that work? Then I think those other things fall in line.
Well, I think you're leading by example by following your own passion. So it might be free advice, but you're walking your talk.
Thank you, sir.
Well, Kerry, I've so enjoyed speaking with you, and I look forward to seeing the growth of Msaada Partners and catching up with you again soon.
Likewise. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Kerry. Before we go, I'm excited to share that we've launched our comic strip, The Adventures of Majira and Nexy. You can find the first issue at our website, nexuspmg.com, under the Original Content tab. Thank you for listening. If you like our show, please give us a rating and review on iTunes. And you can show your support by sharing our show with a friend, or reach out to us on social media, where you'll find us under our Nexus PMG handle. If there's a subject or topic you'd like to hear about, send me an email, btu@nexuspmg.com, or contact me via our website, nexuspmg.com. And while you're there, you can sign up for our monthly newsletter, where we share what we're reading and thinking about in the clean tech, green tech sectors. Bigger Than Us is a Nexus PMG production.